Well, welcome to the GLREA Thursday evening Zoom presentation, My Solar Stories. And I'm glad you could join us for this presentation tonight. And I'd like to first thank our sponsors, the State Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, EGLE, Homeland Solar, McNaught and McKay, Iron Ridge Racking, and Harvest Solar. Many of you are already members of GLREA, and we appreciate that. If you're not, we would love to have you join us. We're a membership organization, GLREA, that depends on our members for financial support and to help us with advocacy. Tonight we have a special guest, Peter Sinclair, who's been around talking about renewable energy and climate change for a long time. He's a Michigan-based videographer specializing in climate change and renewable energy. He has created hundreds of educational videos correcting climate science misinformation. He has an independent Climate Denial Crock of the Week series and a monthly This Is Not Cool series that he does for Yale Climate Connections. Peter is a frequent speaker on climate change, renewable energy, and communicating science, a graduate of the University of Michigan. Peter lives in Midland. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Peter. And please mute yourself until after the presentation is over. Peter, thanks for joining us.
Hi, John. Thanks for inviting me. This is a real pleasure. I'm going to go ahead and share screen. And it worked a minute ago, so hopefully all will be well. And then just for those of you that don't know me or my work real quickly, I'm Michigan born and based. I've been specializing as a videographer in climate and energy for, I don't know, 16 or 17 years now. What I'm most proud of is that at this point, probably 1,000 or more scientists that I've talked to think well enough of the work that I've been doing that they have been inviting me out into some of the extreme places where they do work and collect data. And over the last decade, I've worked in the Arctic with, among others, Dr. Jason Box, who you see here, of the Geologic Survey of Denmark and Greenland, a number of other scientists that I have spent time with. This is a satellite photo from NASA of our dark snow camp in 2014 on the Greenland ice sheet. And I've, in that time, been to the Arctic on or around the ice sheet for 7 trips, the most recent one a year ago, last July. And this was the glacier front where we were taking samples and I was learning from the scientists. And but my work has turned over the last several years more towards the clean energy space, because I think that maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the battle was raising people's awareness about climate change. And now the fight of our lives is to deploy the clean energy that we need to avoid the worst effects of climate change. And so I'm trying to take the same kind of practices and stuff of interviewing on the ground experts about these issues to really learn firsthand what's going on. And for a lot of the work that I'm doing, the people who are most affected are farmers and landowners around Michigan and the Midwest, who are being asked to participate in the sense of allowing their land to be used for some of these solar projects and wind projects that we're going to need if we're going to produce energy at utility scale that we need to get out of this jam that we're in. And one place in particular where I have spent a lot of time over the last couple of years is a place called Montcalm County in western central Michigan, where the farmers there, the landowners, have been beaten up really badly over the last couple of years. And I wondered if any of them would be willing to talk to me about their experience. And so I reached out to some of them at the beginning of the year, and to my pleasant surprise, they were more than willing. They were dying to talk. And so I made a series of videos to kind of share the insights and impacts of what they're telling me, of what it means to try to deploy clean energy, and the challenge, and I would say the crisis that we're in right now, because we got a lot of people for whom climate awareness is very high, a lot of like really great communities like in Southeast Michigan and Grand Rapids and elsewhere that are moving ahead with a lot of great climate goals. But unless we win this discussion in the rural areas across Michigan, across the Midwest, we aren't going to reach any of these goals, and we are behind now. So I've got a couple of videos here just to kind of introduce you to some folks who have become my friends. And I would remind you that most of these folks are very conservative Republicans with whom I would probably have many disagreements on a range of issues, but they see the value of clean energy. They're starting to see the value of dealing with climate change. And moreover, they are hard-pressed farmers who are trying to find ways to diversify their income to survive in weather regimes that are increasingly unpredictable and like what we've seen historically. So I'm going to jump right into this first one, and we'll just proceed from here.
Some 300,000 people jammed the streets of New York's West Side to demand action on climate change. On a hot, muggy day after the Earth's warmest summer on record. For many marchers, this was a family affair. Lisa Hoyos, founder of Climate Parents, brought her 2 sons from San Francisco. She wants to move away from coal, oil, and gas, the fossil fuels driving climate change.
100% clean energy, safe energy, what we like to call kid-safe, climate-safe energy.
The clean energy future that most Americans hope for will not be built in New York, San Francisco, Detroit, or Chicago. It depends on thousands of vital construction projects sited in thousands of rural communities across the United States. Fossil fuel interests have shrewdly identified these small communities as critical choke points in the energy transition and planned a coordinated campaign of misinformation, fear, and intimidation to stop it. The strategy is having success. A recent study from Columbia University found restrictions on clean energy in 31 states, ranging from moratoriums to outright bans.
I was on the planning commission, chairman of the planning commission. I'd been chairman for approximately the last 10 years. I turned in my resignation on January 23rd of this year. Just the last 2 years of this turmoil that's gone on with the turbines and the solar and the abuse that we've taken over the last 2 years, it just has worn thin on me.
I don't know how we got to this as a society where we've got just a lynch mob mentality. I know when this thing started, no one came to the planning commission or the township boards in any of the townships that I'm familiar with and said, I've got some concerns about wind I'd like to talk about. And taking that lynch mob approach that you better see it my way or else, and it's really sad.
One of the past members, he was at a local gas station pumping gas down the Clifford Lake, and there was a lady pulled up on the other pump. Well, you're that person on the PC, and started cursing at him, and she spit on him. You know, we didn't sign up for this kind of abuse.
Nobody wants to go and sit there and have people call you names and ridicule you the whole time you're sitting there for what little bit of money we were getting, you know.
Social abuse on social networks, name calling, accusations.
And it was very hard to just sit there and let them talk to you and talk down to you, you know, accuse you of things that wasn't true at all.
I was never brought up to treat people like trash.
as these people came in and continually said horrible, horrible things, and in person, on social media, Anderson's business and say horrible negative comments on his business page.
A friend of ours has an orchard and a petting zoo, and they've said don't patronize him because he's in favor of wind turbines.
They tell everybody on Facebook to boycott us.
And the crazy thing was, if you went around the county, it was the same dozen or 24 people that would go to every single township board meeting and try and intimidate. It didn't matter if they lived in the township or not.
You saw the same people going to all these meetings all the time. Same people. It was predictable. They're yelling and saying horrible things to people and how horrible our township officials are.
There'd be probably 40, 50 people there, a lot of them from different townships, different counties.
At first, there was like 6 or 8 people from the township that were truly anti-wind to the point of being, it controlled their life. I mean, this is all they think about.
These either national groups or state level groups that come in, these advocates organize, and they have a template, and all the signs look the same, all the signs that they put up on the roadside and all the websites look the same, and they're the same stock photos of a wind turbine on fire that have been used hundreds and hundreds of times over. They're the same debunked theories and debunked studies from years ago.
If you look at the things that are being presented on our community, you'll see those same exact tactics, whether it's in Ohio or Indiana or wherever you're talking about. Same exact information being shared Facebook to Facebook, same stuff being shared at township meetings. That's the scary part.
They come in and they tell these groups that they have to overwhelm the townships with emotion and flash mobs and near riots and yelling and screaming and intimidating local elected officials, intimidating farmers.
They called this guy up, and this guy is older than I am, and just chewed him up one side and down the other, actually yelling at him. And this guy told me, he says, I never had anybody talk to me that way in my life.
Intimidating anyone who stands up for property rights and stands up for what we believe might be the future.
People from outside would come in and they would be very negative.
What's your name?
Where are you from?
My name is Bob. Bob from where? From outer space. Yeah, that's what we thought.
They would actually be very brutal at times towards me as a supervisor. And they would disturb the meeting. I mean, literally, they would be pounding on the floor or on the cabinets that are next to them just to make noise.
The use of Facebook is just unbelievable.
One of the gals, or 2 of them, are on Facebook all day long. They don't have jobs, but they're on Facebook all day long.
They don't allow anyone that has a dissenting voice on those. They'll ban people. They make it a closed group. It's an echo chamber for these people to share all their crazy ideas and get riled up and then go try and overwhelm local organizations.
When we had our meetings, we'd have 30 or 40 people there. Well, obviously 10 to 12 maybe before it got all done, maybe a few more than that, ended up being from our township, but we'd have 40 or 50 people. It was standing room only in our township hall.
There were people that would attend the meetings from outside our township, other townships, but also outside the county. We did one Zoom meeting and we had phone calls from out of state.
There'd be probably 40, 50 people there, a lot of them from different townships, different counties. Not anybody that would be voting in our community, but they wanted to put butts in seats, and that's what the narrative was supposed to be, is all these people don't want them.
I mean, and they were there to harass and try to bully us into thinking their way.
Oh, absolutely. When it's standing room only in a board meeting for a township that traditionally has only a few people in the seats, and they're screaming and yelling, and anyone that speaks in favor of renewable energy gets called a greedy farmer and a corrupt politician, and they're banging on the windows.
The other people won't come to the meetings if they think they're going to get attacked. You know, we had to be there because we're the board. But somebody that maybe has signed for a wind turbine or wind or solar aren't going to come because they don't want to be blasted like we were.
They get their little clans that will travel from township, to board meetings, to planning commission meetings. A few gentlemen, they just go there to cause trouble. That's all they're there for. They're I feel they're uneducated people.
And you'd have grown men weeping, just breaking down weeping at the thought that they might see a wind turbine. Or that solar panels were going to destroy their lifestyle.
My position was you have to consider the whole township, all the residents. How's that going to benefit them?
My family's been here for generations, and now what? Now I'm a piece of crap because I've signed my property up for windmills or solar, you know? I mean, when does property rights come into play?
It got so bad, we had to have sheriff deputies at our meetings.
When I was chairman, I'd have to have a deputy sheriff there most of the time to keep peace.
A guy that owns a furniture store in town, we told everybody don't shop at his place. Don't go to that furniture store, shop somewhere else, because he leased his land out. In fact, he even got a threat once. Somebody threatened to burn his building down.
To the level of people going and banging on each other's doors, threatening officials. And these are farmers that have lived there all their lives. Their parents had lived there all their lives. They just got on the township board to try and do the right thing, and they're being accused of every single thing in the world.
One meeting, one of the gals, she come after me and another fellow that was on the board. I thought she was going to bite us. Come after us like a barracuda. Just roar!
Our township officials were threatened. There is still fear within our community. That mob mentality is still being used in our community to keep people suppressed so they won't question these people.
Liable to be a gunfight over it. These people are so crazy. They hate these things so bad.
It requires a cult of personality behind some of these people that push this narrative so hard and are so invested in the destruction of wind turbines and the destruction of solar and the destruction of anyone, whether it's a farmer or a politician, who believes in them.
In part 2 of this series, we'll examine that cult of personality and its impact on a farming community in the upper Midwest.
Okay, so when I first got into this video work, a big part of what I was doing was jumping in on the internet to defend scientists who were under attack. And so I started interviewing some of the very top level climate scientists from around the world, like Michael Mann and Kevin Trenberth and Malcolm Hughes and many others, who had, because of their visibility, they were under just constant duress, constant threat, sometimes physical threat, and a whole range of tactics was being used against them. And so that was a series of interviews that I conducted 10 to 15 years ago. And what struck me about in my conversations with the farmers is that they were being subjected to exactly the same tactics as I had seen against the scientists. And it struck me that this is not a coincidence, because in fact, some of the very same organizations that were organizing those attacks on scientists a dozen years ago are now organizing the attacks on clean energy deployment today. And so they basically have ported those same tactics from a larger stage using against scientists now to multiple smaller stages at the township and county level against farmers and landowners. And so this next video goes into some of the roots of that activity.
There are these organizers that come in that are totally invested in the destruction of wind and solar and the destruction of local communities that might support it.
It's almost like a cult type deal, is what it looks like to me. If you're an anti-wind person, whoever's behind this, you believe everything they say and nothing that anybody else has to say.
And anything they say goes, and nothing can be said bad about them.
But there's someone out there, I think, that a little bit higher up than what our county is, coaching these people.
So a lot of the stuff that they ask, you like, where'd you hear that from? Or how do you know that? Or, you know, they're being coached.
People you thought had a lot of common sense, whoever the big cheese is, that's who they believe.
You have any idea who the big cheese is?
Well, we heard right from the start that there was Kevin Martis.
You had people like Kevin Martis.
Kevin Martis.
A few names that I've had dropped would be Kevin Martis.
One of the fossil fuel industry's key messengers in Middle America is Kevin Martis, who has inserted himself in community conversations across the heartland.
I'm also a senior policy fellow at E&E Legal Institute.
E&E Legal is a Washington, D.C. based lobbying firm which receives funding from the fossil fuel industry. In 2012, E&E's predecessor organization invited right-wing activists from across America to a special training session aimed at opposing clean energy projects. Among the attendees, Kevin Martis, who described himself as a real estate investor and contractor from Blissfield, Michigan, and listed among his goals seeking funding to lobby in the Michigan Capitol. E&E Legal is well known over the past decade for a campaign of harassment, intimidation, and bullying against scientists and academics around the United States, including NASA atmospheric physicist James Hansen and Malcolm Hughes of the University of Arizona.
I think psychologically it has a somewhat similar effect to living in a police state.
For his part, Mr. Martis denies receiving any compensation from the fossil fuel industry for his decade of extensive travel, testimony, social media advocacy, and public presentations. In fact, those who question Mr. Martis's credentials or motivations often receive threats of legal retaliation from an elite Detroit law firm. Recently, in a Facebook posting, Mr. Martis laid out E&E Legal's recipe for fossil fuel advocates who wish to influence or intimidate local, township, or county officials. He writes, "Your county commissioners will not be moved by facts. They will be moved by political fear. If your plan for success involves urging the county government to take steps that require some blend of courage and intelligence, you will lose." He goes on to emphasize fear as the most important tactic. Over the past 2 years, that philosophy of fear and intimidation has been deployed in Montcalm County, Michigan, in an attempt to block clean energy projects, both wind and solar.
When people come up and poke their finger in your chest, and we have people come drive in our driveway and yell and scream at us.
Did you ever feel personally threatened or?
I did.
Our township officials were threatened. There is still fear within our community.
Time and again, when Mr. Martis becomes involved, formerly low-key meetings become settings for anger and division. In case after case, Mr. Martis's involvement in a community correlates with disrespect, disorder, and disruption.
How about then just shut the hell up?
It was Dave's original.
I'll call a meeting. Please do.
We've had vandalism at the town hall. We've had vandalism to our sign. During this meeting, outbursts of any remarks will not be tolerated, and threats to township officials will be prosecuted.
This here letter, it states to me, and then he says, then you must be one stupid blank idiot in a world where you're just a stupid blank farmer. There's a liar and a cheater, and he blanks everyone over.
When people that you knew, friends and neighbors, turn into like a cult type situation. And maybe I'm not going to say that I'm 100% right, but it was very, very strange.
In Montcalm County, Mr. Martis's followers adopted language with almost a religious tone.
He has no morals. He doesn't have a soul.
There's one gal that I won't mention her name, but she lives off to the east of us, who has stated in writing, whenever she sees a wind turbine, she thinks of the apocalypse and the end of the world.
But I think the one over the top was when one of the men was a friend of ours. It stood up and said, "You're all going to hell." And I'm, it just all, what do you say to that? Because we don't agree on a subject, no.
More than one local official described an anti-clean energy rally with the trappings of a revival meeting.
Almost tent revivals, where people would come in and sing and ask for donations and cry and weep and gnash their teeth.
It was like a pep rally that they were having, and there was a man there that was really encouraging them, and this is what you need to go and do, and this is, you need to hoop and holler.
Some of those churches you go in and you're praising, like that's what it was. Let's praise. I mean, they put these people like Kevin Martis on this pedestal. Literally, it felt like being at a church and you're like, hallelujah, literally. I mean, that's why it felt so cultish. People just, in tears, and I'm like, how am I the only one that's seeing this and thinking this is crazy?
Sharing the stage with Mr. Martis at the Trufant rally was Michigan gubernatorial candidate Ryan Kelly.
Wind energy is an absolute joke.
Mr. Kelly gained notoriety a few months later after being arrested by the FBI and charged for his participation in the January 6th insurrection at the U.S. Capitol.
Come on, let's go.
7 months before the January 6th event, on his Facebook page, Mr. Martis posted this picture of a burned-out truck damaged in an anti-wind protest in Australia. Martis wrote, "I don't condone this at all, but I have warned state legislators that the true cost of 40, 50, or 60% wind generation in any given state must include the cost of a new Capitol building, because folks won't take it and will resort to extreme actions." That same month, armed demonstrators entered the Michigan Capitol building in Lansing, angry, they said, because of public health measures related to COVID-19. The New York Times later called it a dress rehearsal for the January 6th attack on democracy and the electoral process. A transition to carbon-free energy is vital to preserve a livable planet for future generations. But a coordinated misinformation campaign about climate change has evolved into an attack on clean energy technologies, using misinformation, but also intimidation, harassment, and fear.
The polls in the state of Michigan show 2/3 of the population is in favor of renewable energy. It's just this very vocal, very militant anti-groups that don't want it anywhere near them.
Those people don't have good intentions, and those people have a certain agenda. Those people come into these rural communities and tear them apart and leave. That's real.
It requires a cult of personality behind some of these people that push this narrative so hard and are so invested in the destruction of wind turbines and the destruction of solar and the destruction of anyone, whether it's a farmer or a politician, who believes in them.
So I think there's more that I could say, but I think I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop there and see if we have any time for Q&A. We've got a half an hour or so. So this is as good a time as any if anybody has any reactions, responses, or questions on what you've just seen.
Yeah, but please, use the reactions button at the bottom where you can kind of raise your hand, virtual hand. It just makes it easier for us to know who has a question. So Yeah, who's got a comment or a question? People are digesting everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I imagine a lot of you haven't personally experienced this. So one of the reasons we wanted to bring Peter to talk to the group is that, unless you live in a local community or are kind of paying attention to this, you basically aren't aware of what's going on across the Midwest, across the country, certainly in Michigan. But let's start with a question from Dale. Dale, go ahead.
I'm in Livingston County in Heartland, and I think there's some of the townships, Cohocton and Marion Township, have recently made some solar ordinances. Like I think in Marion Township, they've disallowed any farmland to be used for solar, and they've said, here's a specific area like around 696 or around 96, the highway, that you could put solar, but otherwise nowhere else. And I'm not sure if my particular in Heartland Township, I don't think that they've done anything yet, but they're talking about it. How do you recommend people, push back against this, or make sure that any ordinances or limitations that they pass at a township level, you need to respect landowners' rights to do what they want with their land. And I don't quite get how that is getting past all of these places.
Well, I was in a meeting. I've been some of the wildest meetings have been in Livingston County. I was in a meeting in Cohocton that was probably the single craziest meeting I've ever been in. There was one guy there with a sidearm strapped on. I had not seen that in a township meeting. Begs the question: what do you plan to do with that? Exactly. And we see this all over. The tactic is for people to show up, and people will show up from from miles and miles away. That's part of the reason I got into this, is because I saw it firsthand here in Midland County, where people drove in from 100 miles away. They were organized on Facebook and activated by these conspiracy theories. So they think that they're fighting back against some kind of globalist plot to do something. And so they're just all hopped up, and they show up at these meetings. They showed up here in Ingersoll Township, and I was just utterly taken aback by the how well organized it was, and how just the deeply dark kind of tone of the whole thing. And so they do intimidate boards. The Michigan Zoning Enabling Act, under which this is all governed, is the best of my understanding, and I've had attorneys basically confirm this, is technically you cannot zone out a legal use of land on someone's private property, and solar and wind are legal uses of land. But what you see over and over again is these ordinances that will say, yeah, you can have a wind turbine, but it's got to be 5,000 feet from the nearest road or something like that, or they'll put ridiculous restrictions on it. And the same thing with solar, usually with some kind of a setback or something like that. And so it doesn't exactly say you can't have this, but it sets conditions that make it impossible for any developer to realistically do it. Now, that is technically illegal, but the law doesn't have any teeth unless somebody chooses to sue. There's no criminal penalties in the law. It's just like civil action. That is the only way that it could be enforced. And up until very recently, developers have not been willing to go through the process, or very few have been willing to go through the process of suing. But now we've reached a point where a lot of farmers, especially in the solar area, are hiring attorneys. We had the first developer lawsuit filed about 3 weeks ago in White River Township in Muskegon County. We've had a landowner sue in Azalea, Michigan, which I guess is in Milan area. I don't know if that's northern Monroe or southern Washtenaw. And so the lawsuits are starting to break out, and there is a great deal of pressure on legislators to come in and do something, because more and more of the township officials that I'm hearing from are saying, hey, we're over our heads here, and we're in a rock and a hard place. And if we can't create a what is called an exclusionary ordinance, like this angry crowd wants us to, because if we do, we're likely to be sued, and we don't have the money to bear up under a serious lawsuit, either from an organized group of farmers or from a developer. And so it's reached kind of a crisis level right now, and we have here in Michigan. I was just in a major meeting in Lansing yesterday of developers and clean energy advocates of various stripes, and the goals that Michigan has as a state for clean energy are ambitious, and they are laudable, and I'm all for it. But unless something gets done in the way of siting reform at the state level that creates some kind of a pathway for these projects to get cited and takes the pressure off some of these local officials who I believe would very much like to have this ball in somebody else's court, we're not gonna come close to any of those goals. So that's why I'm trying to reach out to as many people as possible and just make it clear we need help. We need people to show up at meetings, or failing that, we need them to write letters or email or call these officials. If you are in a place, if you're in Livingston County, these officials need to hear from you. Letters to editors, social media. The antis are light years ahead of us on social media, because there's a cadre of people across the country who are very right wing, who have found it is apparently really easy to monetize social media platforms using conspiracy theories, anger, and just general misinformation and craziness. Much easier on the right wing conservative side than it is on the liberal side. And so it's a tide that we're swimming against, and I'm open to ideas as to what people think we might do.
Go ahead, Fred.
Yeah, Peter. Yeah, I understand there are discussions about legislation to take away, basically, or limit the power of townships and local areas to use zoning to stop solar and wind, make the siting a state prerogative. I don't know about the political viability of that. As we'll see, it seems like there's a very short sort of window to get stuff like that passed this year. But even, I mean, if that's a possibility, it would seem like it would take a major campaign to get it passed. And then the question is, what will happen in counties and locations if local control is taken away to some degree? It would seem like we still need the kind of local efforts that you're talking about.
We will still need it. Those officials are still going to need support, and they're going to need to hear from people. The difficulty for me is that in most of these areas, they're very conservative, very Republican areas. And climate change is just not a defining issue for a lot of these folks, although that is changing. It is gradually steeping into the discussion, and people are starting to recognize, and you hear some of the antis starting to acknowledge that they may have in their audience people that are concerned about climate change, and they try to find ways to get around that. So there's an increasing recognition that is an issue, but it is not it's not an overriding issue. So we have to talk about things like property rights and the benefits of tax revenue for schools and roads and libraries and senior services and sheriff patrols and fire rescue, which are real and huge. And if you talk to local officials in Huron County and Gratiot County and Isabella County, as I have, fire chiefs, school superintendents, sheriffs, township supervisors, they will tell you that it's just been a step change since before they had, in the instance of Gratiot County, wind turbines and increasingly solar, because these are rural areas are just are broke. They're flat on their backs. They're indigent. They're reliant on the rest of us to meet even some of the basic needs, and they're not doing a very good job meeting those. So there's a great story to tell, and I am starting to have conversations with people on kind of the Republican side of the aisle who recognize that there's a need for something here. And the more practical ones among them recognize that, look, you may not believe in climate change, but you know who does believe in climate change? General Motors and Ford and Stellantis and Dow and Hemlock Semiconductor and Steelcase and Meyer and 100 other companies that would like to locate in Michigan, but are constrained by their shareholders to power themselves more and more on clean energy. And they won't come here if they can't get clean energy. So this is, there is a huge economic case and huge pressure on the part of some of the most solid, you would say, conservative citizens, corporate citizens of the state to get this done. But we do need more voices of just ordinary people, especially people who live in these communities, to come out.
Can I ask a question? I'm sorry, I can't make my camera work.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Marcia.
And I couldn't raise my hand either. I've got a problem. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. It's really scary and so annoying. Is there some way that in a local township meeting, the township board can ask everybody who is not a citizen or a person who lives in that township to not speak and to be quiet and not to demonstrate? I mean, why are they even allowed to be there? That's what I don't understand. Well, anybody can go to a meeting and anybody can speak at a meeting. And that's just sort of, that's the rules, that's, I believe that's, kind of legally codified. But what the advocates for clean energy lack is the intensity that these anti-folks have. They've got intensity, and it's just like the people that show up at the school board meeting that are convinced that they've got kitty litter trays in the bathrooms, in the school bathrooms. That started in my community in Midland. I mean, it's a national disgrace. But so somebody put out that story in a single school board meeting in one community, and through the magic of social media, suddenly that became something that was repeated in a Senate campaign in New Hampshire 6 months later.
Oh.
You know, and so we're not very good at leveraging social media because we haven't been attacking it with the intensity that we need. And so I've made a whole bunch of these resources available on some websites. I will put them in the chat here. sun101.org and wind101.info. There are a whole bunch of videos there and links to really good, reliable sources that are meant to be used on social media, and they're meant to not only engage in arguments, but end arguments.
So I wonder, if I were on a township board, then I would like to say at the beginning of a meeting where there are a lot of people there who look like they're going to demonstrate or already have, to ask everyone who is actually living in that township to stand up and everybody else to sit down, or vice versa. I mean, I would like to have that demonstrated at the beginning of a meeting. And that would be something that wouldn't be illegal, I assume. I mean, you're not kicking
Well, and
anybody out.
sometimes they do that, you know. I mean, you don't know if people are gonna be honest or not, for one thing. And I think maybe board members find it provocative or embarrassing or cumbersome to do that. And a lot of times they just don't want to poke the bear. And I don't blame them. You know, different kinds of boards have different means of maintaining discipline, and just about every one of these meetings now has a law enforcement presence of one kind or another. And you know, I've been to enough meetings, and you learn over time that it's a whole lot of bluster, and it's meant to be intimidating, but we need people to come out and just not be intimidated, the same way as we need people to come out in defense of school boards and libraries and health departments and everything else anymore, because we're in this just because of the state that we're in this country. And that's probably the most important message, is that I'm worried about climate and I'm worried about energy, but I'm worried about democracy too. I see somebody else has a hand up here.
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
Thank you. I'd like to shift gears just a bit. I live in Langsburg on a lake development. I'm requesting bids for putting a metal roof on and adding solar panels later this summer. I also have a one of the old TV antenna towers attached to the end of my house, and I would like to I'm starting to look for information about putting a small wind turbine on that tower. Do you know, do I have to get a permit for that?
That's a question for John.
Yeah, for sure. You know, anywhere, yeah, you'll need a permit for sure. Yeah. One thing you'll find too is, you know, there used to be not that long ago, people were in the business of solar installers. Typically, they also sold small wind turbines. And what happened was, when the solar systems got much less expensive, nobody was buying small wind turbines because there was maintenance with small wind turbines and there was no maintenance with solar, and the solar was cheaper. And so there are people, and if you're interested, I could refer you to a few people who are left who will do small wind turbines, but most people are strictly solar because of the economics. And that's what happened. Now, the big wind farms, of course, the economics are entirely different.
Sure.
It's just a whole different scale. But all the small wind turbines literally were a victim of lower solar prices. I'll mention too, I'm on my Township Environmental Commission, and we always ask people who are making public comments to identify their street address and where they live in the township. And so anybody can make a comment, of course, but I think most of the township officials that are being kind of harassed probably know that a lot of these people are not from the township. And so I think that's almost kind of obvious that they're outsiders, and that, that's just, it's kind of a sad commentary. The other thing I'll mention is that the GLREA works with the Michigan Conservative Energy Forum at Rivet, and they have a specific Land and Liberty Coalition program targeted at rural areas to help with siting issues, because, like has been mentioned, most of the political officials in rural areas are Republicans. And the Michigan Conservative Energy Forum has some very Republican folks who have very good credentials, and who believe that landowners have a right to do what they want with their property. And they also think that, solar and wind are options for homeowners that they should have. That, to them, it's kind of like, they don't talk about climate change. They talk about electric choice, about property rights. And, I hope, making a significant impact, and are, like I said, a kind of an ally of GLREA. With that, though, let me see if there are other comments or questions, related to any of these issues. We're getting close to 8 o'clock, so we have time for maybe a couple more comments and questions. Okay, Susan, go ahead.
I have a sister who lives in Montcalm County, and they not only had issues with the wind and sun, solar and wind turbines on farms, but they also are on the cusp of losing a huge battery plant, because people have spread a lot of disinformation around about it. They have hired people to come in from out of town and paid them $50. Am I still there? $50 a person to demonstrate. So it's clearly, the dog weighing, or the tail wagging the dog. And the disinformation is, I think that's just, the last 6-7 years, it's really been hyped, and people become very suggestible because they peddle fear. And, when you think about going to one of these meetings, I think about who's got a gun, because we have 400 guns per person. And, all you need is one loose pin to go into a meeting and just shoot it up. And, it's just a matter of when it's going to happen. It doesn't keep me from doing things, but makes me think about it.
And I think that's a big part of the whole gun culture, is that you're meant to be afraid.
Right.
Susan, do you have evidence of the people being paid to come into those demonstrations? Because that is all one piece with what we're talking about here.
I can get that. I can tap into my sister and find out where she learned that information.
If you would, and then John has my contact.
Okay.
I'd like to get that.
Yep. I'll ask her and see if she can drill down. She's pretty good at that stuff.
Sure.
Okay.
Go ahead, Dave.
Steve? Okay, unmuted. I just wanted to say hi to Peter. Peter grew up next to me in Midland, Michigan. Neighbor. We were kids together doing water fights and such. And I want to thank him because the work you're doing is important. I've spent my time trying to explain to GLREA board that, we got some fights on our hands, and they're not pleasant, some of them. and you do a wonderful job of getting that message out to people. And I use your videos with other people. So I just want to thank you for what you do.
I really appreciate that. Thanks a lot. And good times.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, hi, Steve. Go ahead.
Hi, just a couple quick comments. Thanks, Peter. I think that if Peter or some people, if you could prepare a nice video like that could be presented, you know, that the activists and wind supporters and farmers could have easy access to that for an advanced education when you're looking at permitting projects, because I faced off with Kevin Martis a decade or so ago and defeated him quickly because I had all, you know, good information and could counteract his crap. But you need to dispel that right away up front. And if we could get some kind of a video presentation that could be available, maybe even through the township associations or some, you know, some of the state organizations can start, you know, pushing back. And then my other comment to the fellow, don't bother putting a small windmill on your house. Okay, that's it.
Yeah.
Spend the
Right,
money
well,
on solar.
Yeah, and that's the meaning of the Sun 101 and Wind 101 website, sun101.org, wind101.info. And there's also Sun 101 and Wind 101 on Facebook, which are updated daily, sometimes several times a day. So that's all meant to be resources for people to get into this, you know, to bring to their local boards, to share with people on social media, and to engage on a factual basis with this nonsense. But it requires people to be active and be aware. And so we're trying to increase awareness, and I think that's happening. But I need people to talk this up, and I also give Sun 101 and Wind 101 presentations that many people say are very well done and compelling, and I will go anywhere and present to anybody, garden club, library club, service club, or just in your living room with your friends, because that's the mission, and we've just got to keep plugging away and try to counteract this as best we can. So utilize me as a resource if you can.
Boy, Peter, thank you very much for your presentation tonight. I think it's just very helpful to kind of get a better idea of what's going on out there and what we can do. And there was a question in the chat about tonight's recording. All the Thursday evening Zoom sessions are recorded and posted on the GLREA YouTube channel. So you can go to YouTube and just search for GLREA and find the latest recordings. It's because you may know some people who might be interested in this topic, and you can refer them to the recording so that they can kind of, after the fact, kind of hear Peter's presentation and hear our discussion. And it is 8 o'clock. So with that, thanks again for everybody attending. Thanks again for Peter for his enlightening presentation. And I hope you can join us next Thursday for one of our GLREA Thursday evening Zooms. So everybody have
Thanks,
a good
everybody.
weekend. Yeah, take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Be
you.
safe out there.